Kako si ona rekla žuti nešto?
Žuti patuljak, koji je 100 puta veći od zemlje.
A da li tamo netko živi?
Jesi li ti normalan? Znaš li kolika je tamo temperatura?
Pa, velika.
Nemaš ti pojma. Tamo je preko 1.000.000 stupnjeva.
Opet ti milijuni. A kad pada kiša?
Da te djed čuje, ne bi vjerovao. Još 5 koraka.
Dobro, 6.
Sad pazi, na moj znak ga puštaš. Priprema. Pozor, sad.
Evo! Pravo! Samo da ne padne!
Neće, dok god puše vjetar.
Otpusti malo konop, nek ide još u zrak.
Čekaj da probam. Ups!
Ajoj! Nestao je!
Idemo po njega.
O suncu je ispričano mnogo predivnih priča na svim kontinentima i među svim narodima koji su obitavali i obitavaju na zemlji. Neke od tih drevnih priča govore o njegovim tajanstvenim pjegama. U novije vrijeme popularno je govoriti o negativnom utjecaju na naše zdravlje, ako se pretjerano izlažemo tom blagotvornom daru s neba. Važno je i na kojoj ste visini, pri razini mora ili visoko na zaleđenim vrhuncima planina. Ako odete još više u svemirska prostranstva naše galaksije i pritom maštu uskladite sa znanstvenim spoznajama, tada možete nezamislivom brzinom jedriti svemirom. Sve je moguće, samo se treba osloboditi dogmi. Jedna je takva pogrešna teorija trajala 15 stoljeća i toliko se duboko ukorijenila u ljudskoj svijesti da ju je bilo izuzetno teško promijeniti.
The thoughts and philosophy of the Greek philosopher Aristotle were highly influential. He believed that the sun went around the earth and the earth was the center of the universe. And add to that the observations of the great Egyptian astronomer, Egyptian Roman astronomer Ptolemy, who observed the motion of the planets, who observed the motion of the sun, and could explain it all by circular orbits around the earth. The sun went around the earth, the moon went around the earth, and everything seemed to make sense. And therefore, for almost 1,500 years, the conventional wisdom was that the earth was the center of the universe. And the sun was a type of object which went around the earth, very bright, but somehow different from the planets. The planets reflected the light of the sun, and nobody really questioned the fact as to why there were two types of objects orbiting the earth. While the earth was at the center, you had planets like Venus and Mars, but you also had this bright object. You also had this glowing ball in the sky called the sun. Because they were certain the earth was the center of all things, nobody questioned that.
Vrijeme će pokazati da je bilo razloga za sumnju, kao i u puno drugih slučajeva. Recimo u doba astronomski plodonosnog 17. stoljeća, kad su znanstvenici promatrali sunce i pitali se što je to što vide. Mnogi astronomi, a najpoznatiji među njima bio je otkrivač urana William Herschel, vjerovali su da sunčeve pjege nisu mrlje, već rupe kroz koje se može zaviriti u hladnije područje koje se nalazi ispod. Vjerovali su da se kroz te rupe može vidjeti površina nalik zemljenoj, te da bi na suncu moglo biti života. Danas znamo da se radi o kugli uzavrelog plina, ali oni nisu bili sigurni je li ta uzavrela površina, prava površina Sunca. Neki njemački astronomi, kao i francuski astronom Arago, gotovo 100 godina ozbiljno su shvaćali tu ideju. Tek kad je otkriven način analize sunčeve svjetlosti, zaključeno je da je njegova površina vruća i užarena i da ondje nema života.
Joj! Samo da mi ga vjetar ne odnese.
Šta će ti taj šeširić?
Da ne dobijem pjegicu od sunca.
Što si smiješan? Pa i sunce ima pjegice. Zašto ne bi i ti?
The ancient Chinese often looked to the sky for portents when they wanted to do something important, or as an excuse or a reason when something went wrong. And there was one particular emperor who saw sunspots on the sun, which they called does, which we think just means dark regions on the sun. And it took place when it was a very bad time for the empire, when they lost quite a few battles. And he saw it as being his fault. He made the comment that this is on my account. The heavens are not pleased with me and they are punishing the empire. So the emperor saw himself as having a mandate from heaven. And sunspots were one of the way that the gods in heaven announced their displeasure on what the emperor was doing. So the emperor had to take into account and change what they were doing, change courtiers, change the direction. Sunspots were also seen throughout the Greek civilization. They didn't really know what they were. Anaxagoras saw one in 467 BC, and Theophrastus saw one a short time later. They were very puzzling to the Greeks because, on one hand, some of the philosophers said that the sun was perfect. There could be no blemish on the sun. Philosophers like Pythagoras maintained that the sun was perfection, and his views were very important in subsequent centuries. So seeing a spot on the sun was very problematic. And there was a small number of Greek philosophers who said, look, this shows that the sun is not perfect. There could be something else we're missing. And Anaxagoras, for instance, believed the sun was just a huge flaming stone the size of a small island. And therefore it was not a surprise to him that because fires and things that burn are often mottled in their appearance, that the sun should have a spot on it. So some philosophers accepted this, but most of them said if there is a spot on the sun, it's nothing to do with the sun. It's somehow in between us and the sun and we're seeing through it. And that's the view that eventually held sway. Aristotle said that the sun is perfect, and then everybody believed him almost for 1,500 years. So whenever the Greeks or the Romans then saw spots on the sun, they didn't regard it as being anything to do with the sun itself. The earliest drawing of a sunspot we have comes from a medieval monk who lived in Canterbury. We call him John of Worcester, and he was a very important medieval historian. And in the 10th century, he made a very fascinating drawing of a spot on the sun. And you can actually see that it's in two parts. Sunspots tend to come with a very dark central region, and then a lighter, grayer region around them. And we can see those two parts in John of Worcester's fascinating drawing, which is the oldest drawing we have of a spot on the sun.
Jedrenje je najjeftiniji način putovanja na zemlji. Jedina energija potrebna za kretanje stiže od vjetra. No, možemo li zamisliti jedrenje svemirskim prostranstvima? I možemo li zamisliti da je to jedrenje moguće zahvaljujući suncu? I hoće li jednoga dana astronauti postati helionauti?
We are trying to do the first solar sail flight.
The question all the time comes, how can we go outside the solar system and beyond? And at that time is propulsion system cannot work because there is nothing to propel against.
Solar sailing is an idea that's been around for actually most of the 20th century.
As you leave the solar system and come closer and closer, you have a bigger and bigger source of energy than any propulsion system. And that source of energy is the sun. And the sun emits photons.
So the solar sail gets a continuous acceleration from the light particles that are hitting it and from the energy that's being transferred to it.
Can we use the photons to navigate outside the solar system?
So that you can escape the solar system and head out on an interstellar voyage. You can go as much as 10 times as fast as an ordinary spacecraft.
As you leave the solar system, the gravity decreases, but the photon amount of the sun energy increases.
By the time you go out of the solar system, you might be going as much as 100 times as fast because of the acceleration is always acting on the spacecraft. It's always building up speeds.
It is like our grandparents and great-great ancestors did, to use the wind as a method to navigate in the oceans.
It doesn't use fuel. You can fly forever with it.
Louis Friedman je astronautički inženjer, svemirski entuzijast i promicatelj svemirskih istraživanja. Osim što je u NASInom laboratoriju Jet Propulsion vodio odjel za napredna proučavanja planeta i sudjelovao u projektima istraživanja Marsa, Venere, Merkura i Helijeva kometa, s Carlom Saganom osnivač je planetarnog društva, koje na srcu ima samo jedan cilj – istraživanje svemira.
Solar sailing was first proposed by Friedrich Sander in about 1921 or 1924 in the Soviet Union. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, also in the Soviet Union, started writing about it as well as a propulsion technique for spacecraft. And the idea basically languished because there was no space age at that time, no practical way to implement it, until about the late 1940s, when an American by the name of, writing under the name of Russell Saunders, his real name was Carl Wiley, wrote an article about using solar sailing for propulsion of spacecraft. But the idea was so outrageous that nobody would publish it, and he actually wrote it in a science fiction magazine, even though it was a absolutely correct scientific article. And there the idea, again, because there was no practical way to implement it, stayed until about 1960. So in the 1970s, when the space shuttle began to deploy things in space, we began to think about more practical uses of solar sailing, and an engineer by the name of Jerome Wright came up with a way of rendezvousing with Halley's Comet using solar sail. And that was fantastic. It got our attention immediately. Halley's Comet comes in this direction around the solar system while the Earth is going in this direction. So the two end up going in opposite directions. The speeds are enormous, something like 80 kilometers per second as they pass each other. That was considered impossible, but solar sailing made it possible. Unfortunately, the shuttle really wasn't ready in the late 1970s. Our solar sail for the test flight is 30 meters across in diameter, which is a fairly large tent. It's as large as a 10-story building. It's quite a large object. For practical missions in the solar system, you might even want more, 50 meters, 100-meter solar sail, and that's all practical, and we think we can do that. For interstellar voyages, or for some of the more advanced thinking that might take place in a century from now, we studied, when I was at JPL, we studied a solar sail that was kilometers long, and in fact had an effective area or a diameter of 15 kilometers.
And here is the principle of it. Here we are having a bulb, a standard light bulb, to simulate a source of energy or photons, which takes electricity and turned it to photons. Then we have built the principle of a solar sail in the representation of a carbon fiber cloth, and it can be as big as a football field.
Currently, we have to come up with a deployment method. You have to package the sail up, and then you have to deploy it in space. And you can deploy it with booms pulling out a sail, much like a sailboat pulls up a sail when you're out on the ocean. Or you can do it the way we're doing it in our Cosmos 1 test flight. The Planetary Society sail has inflatable structures, a boom that inflates like a tube, and as it inflates, it pulls the sail out along as it does, and that also holds the sail stiff.
Neville Marcwell rukovodio je odjelom za napredne koncepte i tehnološke inovacije NASA-inog laboratorija Jet Propulsion na Kalifornijskom institutu za tehnologiju.
We can use these photons to navigate. So we demonstrated the idea of a vacuum that we will see outside the solar system, and this is in the representation of that vacuum tube. And the light represents the sun, and the carbon sail is represented by that wafer. And as we increase the energy, you can see the sail navigating. And as I increase it more, it goes up. I can even get it up, and I can get it down. As I decrease the light,
Solar sailing uses the pressure, the force of light energy, not the solar wind. A lot of people think it's the solar wind, but solar wind is protons and neutrons from the sun, so they're massive particles. And they do push the spacecraft, but 3 orders of magnitude smaller force than the light energy itself, the pure energy of light. Light can be thought of as packets of energy from what we call photons. And those photons, when they hit the sail, reflect off the sail and transfer momentum to it. So solar sailing is basically hoisting a large, very thin, very reflective structure.
other concept that is great into this is it is sensitive to the speed. As I pump the photons very high, it is like someone getting a punch. He can go very, very fast. And it can go almost at 0.7 the speed of light. And that's basically the value of this concept.
Europeans are interested in it, Japanese are interested in it, the Americans are interested in it, the Russians were interested in it, but nobody would commit to a test flight. The cost of a test flight was just too great for the space agencies. Well, what happened in 1999 and 2000 is a Russian group that was working on inflatable structures had a low-cost launch vehicle idea and an inflatable structure which could deploy a sail, and they said, maybe we can do a test flight now, we can do this very low cost, because they were willing to basically offer a low-cost launch opportunity on a converted intercontinental ballistic missile. Volna was going to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile that would fly from the Murmansk outside the ocean, the Arctic Ocean in Murmansk, and put our spacecraft into orbit. Well, we built the spacecraft, and we had a successful effort to actually get the whole project underway and completed, deliver the spacecraft for launch, and in June of 2005, we attempted the launch to fly the first mission, and unfortunately, the Soviet ballistic missiles did not work as well as advertised, which I suppose is good for the world, but it wasn't good for us. And unfortunately, the rocket engine shut off, a turbo pump cut out too early, and the engine only fired 35 seconds. The whole spacecraft went into the sea, and our mission was lost. We give up on that idea of converting ballistic missiles to beating swords into plowshares is a good idea, but literally this sword is too old to be reliable. We're going to fly on the Soyuz frigate, which is a workhorse of modern Russian technology. The Soyuz is used to take astronauts to space every few months. The sail goes to an orbital altitude of about 1,000 kilometers. That's when it's deployed from its rocket. 1,000 kilometers is just above the atmosphere, so there's no interference from atmospheric drag. That would be very bad if we flew too low into the atmosphere. So we start at 1,000 kilometers, roughly circular orbit, roughly polar orbit, and then just try to spiral away from Earth and build up our energy as we fly the mission. The real advantage of solar sailing is that it can fly indefinitely long without using any consumable fuel. So the spacecraft can be a pure spacecraft. Right now, all other methods of propulsion require carrying a propellant along, and so 90% of the spacecraft's mass is propellant that you use up during the flight, and when you use it up, it's no good anymore. So the real advantage of solar sailing is to fly long periods of time, continuously building up your speed. Acceleration is very small, 1,000th the amount of gravity, just a few millimeters per second. It's quite a small acceleration, but it operates every second all the time, so you can build up enormous speeds. You can get to hundreds of thousands of kilometers per hour as you fly through the solar system. Eventually, you can go out of the solar system. And that's the really exciting part of solar sailing, because of all the known propulsion technologies, it's the only one that leads to practical interstellar flight. Of course, we would run out of sunlight as we leave the solar system, so the future of solar sailing is really not solar, it's laser. And you could imagine a large laser station powered by the sun in interplanetary space, focusing the laser light over long, long distances to a sail that now is traveling to another star system. That is the only way we know how to do practical interstellar flight. For the immediate practical benefits of solar sailing, moving large masses throughout the solar system, being able to hover like a helicopter in different points by offsetting the sun's gravity, these are important advantages, but the real ultimate advantage is interstellar flight. You know, the Wright brothers flew the first airplane, and they flew 12 seconds and went nowhere. And yet it was historic. Everybody knows what they did, and because they proved the technology could be done. Our goals are somewhat similar. We want to fly longer than 12 seconds, but if we fly 12 hours and actually control the solar sail flight, we will be successful.
Nikad ga nećemo naći.
Ne kužim kako je mogao nestati.
A vjetar ga je odnio. Ko zna gdje i ko zna koliko daleko. Odustajem. Vraćamo se.
I, znaš što? Možda imam jednog zmaja kojeg nikad nisam koristio. Baš ću ga potražiti. Ups. Šta je ovo?
Ovo je jedna fora ljudska, ali se raspala.
A šteta, baš je guba.
This is the iPort Vision training system. It's based on over 30 years of experience in working with more than 30 to 40,000 patients. It's based on a very, very simple concept. Red and blue have opposing effects on the autonomic nervous system and on the eye. By using this, you remind the system of its natural design. You train the eyes for optimal performance. This is all part of the whole field of color therapy. In working with colors, I realized that light is truly the medicine of the future. But it all comes back to one thing. The most important source of light is sunlight.
Dr. Djeca je u jedinstvenoj knjizi Svjetlost, lijek budućnosti predstavio povijest znanosti o dobrobiti svjetlosti za zdravlje. Znanost u isto vrijeme staru i potpuno novu. U davnoj prošlosti bila poznata kao helioterapija, ali nakon što je potpuno nestala u mraku srednjeg vijeka, u 18. stoljeću bilo ju je potrebno ponovno otkriti suvremenim znanstvenim metodama. Od tada, u zadnjih 3 stoljeća, razvijani su mnogi, danas još uvijek nedovoljno poznati načini liječenja svjetlošću.
Here we are, standing on a beautiful beach in Maui, Hawaii. It's just gorgeous here and feels so good. And yet so many people around the world are saying that sunlight is bad for you. That ultraviolet, which is a portion of the natural spectrum of sun, is actually unhealthy. How can it feel so good and yet be so bad at the same time? Something just doesn't make any sense about that. We've evolved for millions of years under full spectrum sunlight. One of the most biological portions of the visible spectrum, or the spectrum of the sun, is the ultraviolet. We know that the ultraviolet actually improves your mood, improves reproductive functions and sexual functions. It lowers cholesterol, it lowers blood pressure, it increases the functioning of the heart. We know that it goes through the skin and actually has a lot to do with the synthesis of vitamin D and then the absorption of calcium and other minerals to make your bones strong and to allow your body to function properly. So how is it possible that something that is so biologically valuable to the body, the world is saying, don't go into the light, stay away from the sun, put sunscreens all the time, protect your eyes all the time? One of the things when I started working with light, I tried to understand why that was. When people went outside, they felt so good. When they sat inside under abnormal light, they didn't feel so good, and yet the world was saying, stay away from nature. Protect yourself at all times. And so one of the things that I realized about light is like anything else, you need moderation. There's nothing wrong with sunlight, and there's nothing wrong with even ultraviolet light, as long as everything is in moderation.
Dr. Mario Franolić specijalist je urgentne medicine i stručnjak u području baromedicine, to jest liječenja čistim kisikom.
Osnov ljudskog i životinjskog i biljnog uopće ponašanja i djelovanja organizma, svih živih organizama, jesu cirkadijalni ritmovi. Cirkadijalni ritmovi su nešto što nam je donijela pozicija planeta u odnosu na sunce, odnosno kretanje njegovog oko sunca. Znamo, zato se zove cirkadijalni jer se govori o dnevnom ritmu. Radimo tako da recimo često po mraku dođemo na posao, po mraku se vraćamo do sunca i ne vidimo, da smo potpuno izolirani od prirodnog svjetla. To nam poremeti i proces spavanja. Time smo definitivno narušili svoj cirkadijalni ritam. Zbog toga se javlja brojna skupina kroničnih bolesti koje su zapravo ovisne o tome. Obično se to vezuje za mozak, ali nije samo mozak, nego lučenje svih žlijezda je vezano za cirkadijalne ritmove, za svjetlo i tamu i tako dalje. Šetnje po prirodi, šetnje po svjetlu, po suncu su vrlo bitan element preventive i vrlo bitan element, rekao bih, i liječenja i kurative. Nažalost, tome današnja medicina uopće ne posvećuje pažnju. Sunce, odnosno sunčeva svjetlost, je osnov stvaranja i aktivacije jedne vrlo bitne tvari u organizmu koja nam omogućava pravilno funkcioniranje. Svi je znamo kao D vitamin, iako se zapravo teško može govoriti o vitaminu, radi se o tvari koja spada u skupinu hormona i koja nam je osnov za ispravno funkcioniranje prije svega koštanog sustava, ali i brojnih imunoloških procesa i aktivacije nekih drugih vrlo bitnih tvari u organizmu. Koliko je njegov značaj veliki vidi se prije svega kod ljudi koji jesu ili nisu dovoljno izloženi suncu. Pa ćete tako jako rijetko vidjeti osteoporozu kod, na primjer, seljanki koje teško rade u polju, nose velike terete, znači jedno je izloženost radu, a drugo je stalna svakodnevna izloženost suncu. S druge strane, gradska populacija je masovno opterećena osteoporozom. Da bi se stvorila pravilna, mi kažemo, travekularna struktura kosti, nije dovoljan samo kalcij. Najčešće ljudi govore o kalciju kao tvari koja nam gradi kosti. Međutim, stvaranje takve strukture je nemoguće bez D vitamina, jer sam kalcij po sebi nije dovoljan. Možete vi unijeti kalcij umjetno ili prirodno, kako god, i u bilo kakvim količinama D vitamin je taj koji će ga aktivirati i taložiti ga na odgovarajuće mjesto i na odgovarajući način, ili pak će biti u nedostatku D vitamina ta koštana pregradnja sasvim drugačija, patološka, ili je neće uopće biti. A tada se taj višak kalcija opet pojavljuje kao problem zbog stvaranja različitih problema u krvnim žilama, u šupljim organima tipa žučnog mjehura, mokrečnog mjehura i tako dalje. D vitamin kroz to postaje jedna od najvažnijih tvari u preventivi, obrani od mnogih bolesti i u pravilnom sazrijevanju organizma od mladosti, od rođenja. Pa znamo da se kod nedostatka D vitamina kod djece javlja rahitis, pa se zbog toga čak daje i umjetni D vitamina. Zapravo najbolje što se može napraviti za preventivu je sunce. Poznata je anegdota iz davnih vremena, iz 525. godine prije Krista, kada je nakon velike bitke između Egipćana i Perzijanaca Herodot, nakon što su razdvojili Perzijance i Egipćane na one koji su poginuli na dvije skupine, Herodot je promatrao njihove lubanje i zaključio je da su lubanje Perzijanaca jako meke, da vrlo blagim udarcem dolazi do proboja te lubanje. To se pokazalo i u ratu na kraju krajeva kao vrlo značajan element. Za razliku od toga, Egipćani su imali lubanje koje se vrlo snažnim udarcem kamenom nisu razbijale. On je zaključio da je upravo sunce razlog tome. Naime, Egipćani su brijali glave, bili svakodnevno izloženi suncu, dok su Perzijanci stalno imali pokrivene glave kapama, imali su naravno i kosu koju nisu brijali, i s druge strane imali su kape na glavama, tako da je njihova izloženost suncu bila puno manja. U svim starim bolnicama, pogotovo prije ere antibiotika, kada su ljudi bili izloženi tuberkulozi i masi drugih bolesti, plućni odjeli su bili zapravo odjeli sa velikim staklenim površinama gdje su plućni bolesnici sjedili ili ležali u ležaljkama izloženi sunčevim zrakama kroz staklo koje ih je štitilo od hladnoće i vjetra, ali su više sati dnevno boravili na tom suncu. I to je zapravo bila jedina terapija za tuberkulozu, na primjer, ali i brojne druge bakterijske bolesti koje su zahvaćale ljude, a nije bilo lijeka koji bi djelovao protiv njih. Danas smo jako zaboravili u konvencionalnoj medicini zaboravili smo na ovakve terapije, pa ljudi koji imaju recimo plućne ili koštane probleme ne izlažemo suncu, izlažemo ih svim mogućim lijekovima, kemikalijama, procedurama kirurškim, dermatološkim i drugim. Stoljećima je sunce bilo oglašeno najvećim prijateljem čovjeka. U moderno doba sunce nam je oglašeno jednim velikim neprijateljem. Koliko nam je neophodno, toliko nam pokušavaju nametnuti stav da sunce više šteti nego koristi. Ispalo je da danas zapravo ne bi smjeli izaći na sunce da nismo obloženi kemikalijama kojima nas bombardiraju sa propagandnih materijala svih mogućih medija. Svake godine se praktično pojačavaju faktori koje treba nanijeti na sebe da bi se od sunca zaštitilo. Da li to ima smisla? Pa u neku ruku i za neke ljude i do neke mjere ima smisla ukoliko smo definitivno odustali od prirodnog ponašanja. Znate, često se ne događa da se Arapi mažu kremama. Oni imaju odgovarajuću odjeću koja ih štiti od najjačeg sunca, a drugo, po najjačem suncu se rijetko kreću. Pa prema tome, ako tako gledamo na stvari, znači, da li se treba izložiti najjačem suncu? Nikad se nije ni trebalo izlagati najjačem suncu i najjače sunce tijekom dana uvijek je izazivalo oštećenja ako čovjek nije bio zaštićen. Došli smo u eru turizma kada ljudi po cijeli dan leže, prže se na suncu i zato trebaju velike količine nekakvih sredstava koje će spriječiti prodor sunčevih zraka do kože. Time od sunca gube najkvalitetnije i najvrijednije, dobiju od njega samo najgore, ali kemikalije koje se nanose, koliko nas štite od sunčevih zraka, toliko samim svojim prisustvom, pošto su sve do jedne vrlo izraženi alergeni, aktiviraju nama procese alergija za koje poslije okrivljujemo najčešće sunce. I onda se poslije toga kaže nemoj ići na sunce, umjesto da se kaže nemoj koristiti određeni preparat. Da li ipak treba nešto koristiti? Postoje prirodni preparati, prirodna sredstva kojima se štiti koža od prejakog sunca ako se tom suncu treba biti izložen. To su neki prirodni melimi, nekakve, ne znam, od ulja od gospine trave pa nadalje. Ne može čovjek biti dobre krvne slike ako nije izložen suncu. Biće izložen anemiji, bit će izložen anemiji zbog poremećaja u određenom sastavu krvnih stanica i u njihovoj sposobnosti prenosa kisika, jer sunce je jedan od bitnih aktivatora koji poboljšavaju prijenos kisika u stanicama. Sunce direktno ne povećava količinu kisika kao što se često misli, nego omogućava da stanice bolje i dugotrajnije održe svoju sposobnost prenošenja kisika do krajnje periferije. Pored toga, sunce aktivira određene druge tvari poput melatonina koji je vrlo bitan hormon koji nam regulira spavanje, serotonina koji nam je takozvani hormon sreće.
When I began looking at this whole subject matter of ultraviolet light, is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? I realized that some of the early experimentation with ultraviolet light was animal experimentation, where they took animals such as monkeys, where they fixed their heads in devices that had very, very bright light sources. They literally clamped the eyes open so the monkey couldn't close its eyes. They illuminated the eye with very excessive amounts of light, often rendering that monkey blind in that eye. And then they said that's the effect of ultraviolet light. One of the biggest concerns today is the effect of sunlight, specifically sunlight that has ultraviolet in it, on the development of cancer. There's a lot of talk today about being out in the sun too much, and that can contribute to skin cancer, specifically melanoma. But if we actually look at the research, we see that sunlight is actually healthy for you. And there's a higher incidence of melanoma with workers working indoor in offices with artificial lighting than there are with those individuals that are actually spending time outdoors on a regular basis, getting their minimum daily requirement of sunlight on a daily basis. In 1972, I was first introduced and became very excited by the work of Dr. John Ott. John was originally a banker who became very, very interested in time-lapse photography and did a lot of the work for Walt Disney. He had a passion for filming the life of plants in time-lapse photography, where very, very quickly you could see the entire lifespan of a plant. In the process of doing his work, he discovered some very, very fascinating things. If you place these plants under different types of lighting, they develop totally differently. Some of them would flower as natural and normal for them, and some of them would not flower. With certain vegetables, the actual fruit or vegetable would grow or not grow, or grow very large or very, very small, depending on the type of light that those plants were growing under.
Uvidjevši kako na razne biljke, voće i povrće utječe dnevno, a kako umjetno svjetlo, John Ott odlučio istražiti kako svjetlost utječe na životni ciklus životinja. Započeo je sa štakorima i miševima koje je držao pod raznim vrstama fluorescentne svjetlosti, od obične bijele do lampi koje su davale puni spektar.
And what he found was that the lifespan of these animals was dramatically different depending on the type of light that they were developed under. Those that were living under full spectrum light often lived twice as long as those that were living under artificial light that wasn't so healthy for them. Even the development of tumors was dramatically different when these animals were living under light that was significantly different from natural light. But some of the most fascinating work that John Ott did had to do with the type of lighting that children were learning under in the types of schools and classrooms that all of us see every day. He noticed that in classrooms that had children that were hyperactive and had difficulty paying attention, reading, and learning, when you change the lighting in those classrooms to full spectrum fluorescent tubes, which more closely simulated daylight and sunlight, many of these children calmed down. Many of them were able to pay attention better, learn better, and in general, their learning experience was dramatically different. They even noticed a very, very significant drop in the number of dental caries or cavities in these children that were actually in classrooms with light that was more closely simulating daylight. And so John's contribution had a lot to do with the fact that we have to bring outside indoors. The idea of having lighting inside that is so grossly different from the type of light we've evolved under for millions of years just does not work. What John's work showed that our health, our wellness, our lifespan, even the progression of disease and the quality of our ability to read and learn is dramatically improved when the lighting indoors is as close as possible to the natural light that we evolved under for millions of years. He said that if you don't eat the right food, you could suffer malnutrition. But if you're not sitting under the right light, you could suffer from malillumination. And so the message from John Ott is sunlight is critical to our health and our wellness. We need to bring it indoors and have it in our work environments, our schools, and our homes.
Što si to napravio? Tko mornarski čvor?
A kakav je to mornarski čvor?
Nemaš ti pojma. Dođi, pokazat ću ti.
Uzmimo kraj, svinemo, drugi kraj, provučeš, prebaciš, provučeš i to je to. A čovjek koji je mene učio čvorove, rekao je tek onda kad to znaš napraviš žmireće, vidiš ovako, onda si naučio kako se radi čvor. Vidiš ga, op, prebaciš, zatvoriš, povučeš ovdje i pogledaj sad ovo, op, i to je to. Sad ti.
Ti ne bi mogao napraviti kalendar od čvorova?
Kakav sad kalendar od čvorova?
Pa bilo kakav. Godišnji, višegodišnji, mjesečni, tjedni.
Bravo, Silvestre. Za prvi put jako, jako dobro. Stari narodi, oni jednostavno nisu imali pismo i nisu znali kako bilježiti vrijeme. Sad možete zamisliti da je ovo jutro, a ovo mrak. I sad ovak imaš, moramo ujutro, na primjer, ići po vodu, pa onda moramo otići nabaviti, recimo, drva. Ajde, daj taj štapić stavi unutra, tako. Pa moram, na primjer, napisati zadaću, vidiš ovako. I sada sve svoje dnevne obveze imaš, vidiš ovo, voda, drva, zadaća. Kako si obavio koju obvezu, je tako, riješi se ovog predmeta i sve su obveze nestale. Što misliš ti o tome?
Pa, ne kužim kakve tu ima veze s kalendarom.
Djede, on nikad nije čuo za sutance. Možeš li mu ispričati priču?
U drevna vremena živio je narod koji se zvao Sutan. Živjeli su izolirani od svog ostalog svijeta, u dolini dobre rijeke i uz obale velikog jezera. Štovali su sunce kao božanstvo i kao izvor života, te mu redovito zahvaljivali na toplini i svjetlosti. Simbol im je bio sunce, prikazano kao dvije četverokrake zvijezde koje predstavljaju solsticije i ekvinocije, kojima su određivali tijek vremena. Na te dane slavili su svetkovine u čast sunca i odlazili na sveto mjesto da bi se sjedinili s energijom, vibracijom sunca, vjerujući da ono razumije njihovu zahvalnost, da čuje njihov glas i da im uzvraća pozdrav. Poglavica bi svirao ton na velikom instrumentu kojeg su zvali sunčevo uho. I stapajući se sa frekvencijom instrumenta, sjedinjavali bi se s vibracijom sunca.